The cup slipped. Not all the way. Just enough. Just enough that the coffee hit the counter instead of the mug, and Caius Beaumont grabbed a rag and cleaned it before anyone noticed. His hands were moving on instinct now. 3 weeks of double shifts will do that to you. 3 weeks of moving like a machine because the second you stopped, the second you actually thought about any of it, something in your chest started to crack. He didn't look at the clock. He already knew what time it was. Late. Too late for Elio to still be awake. But there he was, tucked into the corner booth like he lived there, legs dangling off the seat, a half-eaten slice of pie in front of him. 7 years old and fighting sleep with everything he had. That boy never complained. Not once. Not about the cold apartment, not about the shoes with the cracked sole, not about the nights he had to eat at the diner because Caius couldn't leave him alone. He just watched. Took everything in with those big quiet eyes and never said a word about any of it. That should have been a comfort. It wasn't. The dinner rush had thinned. A few regulars at the counter. A couple near the window, barely talking. And 3 men at the far end of the counter who had been sitting there for over an hour. Same order. Coffee, black, all 3 of them. They hadn't asked for refills. They hadn't looked at menus. They hadn't spoken to each other the way strangers do when they're filling silence. They just sat, still, like they were waiting for something specific. Caius had noticed them the moment they walked in. He didn't know why. He wiped down the counter for the 4th time and told himself it was nothing. Papa! Elio's voice cut through the low hum of the diner. Caius turned. The boy had climbed down from the booth and was standing in the middle of the floor, pie plate still in his hand, looking at him with that expression, the one that wasn't quite a question yet but was getting there. Come sit back down, Papa. He didn't move. You work every day. I know. Every day, Elio said again, slower this time, like he was making sure Caius heard it. So why won't they pay you? The diner went quiet. Not gradually. All at once. The couple near the window stopped mid-sentence. The regulars at the counter turned their heads. The cook in the back went still enough that the sound of grease on the flat top was suddenly the loudest thing in the room. Caius felt heat crawl up the back of his neck. Elio, you said we need money for the lights. The boy was not whispering. He had no idea he should be. You said we need money for the rent. But you work every day. So where does the money go? Every single pair of eyes in that diner was somewhere it wasn't supposed to be. And then Caius felt it. A shift. Not loud. Not sudden. Just a change in the air, the specific kind you feel when someone who has been very, very still decides to move. He looked toward the counter. The 3 men had turned. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just turned. Like the question had been a signal they were waiting for. All 3 of them at the exact same moment looking directly at Elio. Then directly at Caius. They were identical. Same jaw. Same eyes. Same measured stillness. Even the way they held their coffee cups was the same. Right hand, 3 fingers, resting on the counter. None of them smiled. None of them looked away. Hi viewers, have you ever had a moment where a child said something out loud? Something you've been hiding? And the whole world just stopped? Drop a comment and tell me. What's the one thing a kid said that you weren't ready to hear? For a moment, nobody spoke. The diner held its breath. And then one of them, just one, set his cup down, slowly, deliberately, and said, Who isn't paying him? Caius laughed. He made himself do it. Short, easy, dismissive, the kind of laugh that says nothing to see here, just a kid being a kid. He crossed the floor and took the pie plate from Elio's hand and guided him back toward the booth without looking at the 3 men again. He doesn't know what he's saying, Caius said, loud enough for the room. Kids talk. The couple by the window turned back to each other. The regulars at the counter went back to their coffee. The cook's spatula started moving again. Normal. Back to normal. But Caius's pulse didn't slow down. He could still feel them. All 3 at the counter. Not staring anymore, he checked once carefully, but not gone either. Just present. The way a sound stays in a room after it's already stopped. His manager, Devlin Pruitt, materialized from the back like he always did when something went sideways. Short man, wide shoulders, the permanent look of someone doing you a favor just by being in the same room as you. He pulled Caius aside near the service station, voice low and smooth. Your kid's causing a scene. He's 7. Doesn't matter what he is. You want to keep this shift. Pruitt tilted his head. Handle it. Caius said nothing. Pruitt walked away like the conversation had gone exactly the way he wanted. And maybe it had. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. Tables cleared. Coffee refilled. The 3 men left sometime after 9. He didn't see them go, just noticed the stools were empty. Elio fell asleep in the booth. By the time Caius carried him out to the bus stop, the street was cold and mostly empty, and the only sound was the distant rumble of the last crossdown. He got Elio home, got him into bed. Sat on the edge of the mattress for a minute just breathing. Then he checked his phone. He didn't know why. Habit, maybe. He hadn't been expecting anything. But there it was. Unknown number. No name. No area code he recognized. 3 lines. You've worked 19 days without pay. A pause. Then, why? Caius read it twice. Then a 3rd time. He had told no one that number. Not his sister. Not the guy he sometimes shared a smoke with outside the building. Not anyone. He had kept track in his head, actually kept track, because writing it down felt too real. 19 days, running total, 3 weeks of wages that had never appeared in his account. Excuses from Pruitt every single time. Payroll delay, system issue, end of the week, next week for sure. Nobody knew that. Nobody in that diner. Nobody on that bus. Nobody in this city. And yet, he sat in the dark of the kitchen for a long time. The phone buzzed again. Same number. You should have spoken sooner. He didn't sleep. He lay in the dark with the phone face down on the nightstand and told himself it was nothing. A wrong number? A scam. Someone who had the wrong person. He repeated this until almost 3 in the morning. Then he picked up the phone. He went back through the last few weeks in his head. Really went back. Not just the shifts but the edges of the shifts, who was in the diner, who was at the counter, what he might have said out loud without realizing. And something started to surface. They had been there before. Not just last night. Before that. He was sure of it now that he was actually thinking. Same 3 men. Same corner of the counter. He had noticed them once or twice and let the thought slide right off because diner regulars aren't unusual. People come back when the coffee is cheap and nobody bothers them. He hadn't thought anything of it. But now he was counting. 4 times in the last 3 weeks. Always the same stools. Always after the dinner rush cleared out. Always when the diner was quiet enough that you could hear everything happening at every table. Always watching him. He put the phone on the table. Picked it up again. Who are you? He sent it before he could talk himself out of it. The response came in less than a minute. Someone who noticed what others ignored. Caius stared at the screen. His first instinct was to throw the phone across the room. His second instinct, quieter, harder to push down, was that whoever this was, they were not wrong. Pruitt had been ignoring it. The other staff had noticed and said nothing. His sister had told him to just find another job, like it was that simple, like he hadn't already applied to 11 places with no callbacks. Someone had noticed. That shouldn't have felt like anything. Felt like everything. Elio wandered out of the bedroom at 6:30 with his hair pressed flat on one side, dragging his blanket, and found Caius still at the kitchen table. You didn't sleep. I'm fine. The boy climbed into the chair across from him and looked at the phone. Then at Caius. Are those people from the diner bad people? Caius frowned. What people? The ones who looked at me. Elio pulled the blanket tighter. When I asked about the money, children don't sense power. They sense intention. And something about the way Elio said it, not scared, just careful, made Caius's chest do something complicated. I don't know yet. Elio nodded like that was a fair answer. The phone buzzed. Caius looked at the screen. Give me your address. No. He typed it without hesitating. Short. Final. He set the phone face down again and got up to make Elio breakfast. Eggs. Toast. He focused on the sound of the pan, the smell of the butter, the ordinary weight of a normal morning. He focused hard. The phone stayed quiet. He took that as a good sign. He told himself whoever it was had moved on, lost interest, found someone else to play games with. By the time Elio was eating and talking about something that happened at school last week involving a broken crayon and a boy named Marcus, Caius had almost convinced himself. He got to the diner at 11. Pruitt was already there, standing near the register with his arms crossed, and the look on his face was the specific kind Caius had learned to read over the past few months. Not angry, worse, patient. The look of a man who had already decided how something was going to go. You're late. By 4 minutes. 4 minutes adds up. Pruitt uncrossed his arms and pulled at the cuff of his jacket. You know the Rodriguez twins are looking for steady work? Good workers. Show up on time. Don't cause scenes with their kids in my dining room. Caius kept his voice level. My son asked a question. Your son made my customers uncomfortable. Pruitt smiled then, and the smile was worse than the look. I need people here I can count on, Caius. I'm starting to wonder if that's you. Still no mention of the pay. Caius waited, let the silence sit, watched Pruitt's face for even a flicker of acknowledgement. 19 days, 19 shifts, money that was owed, and saw nothing. Not guilt, not discomfort, just the mild patience of a man who had never once worried that anyone would push back. Poverty doesn't just take your money. It trains you to accept less than you deserve, teaches you to shrink, to thank people for the scraps they toss you, to stay quiet because staying quiet keeps the little you have left. Caius had been quiet for 19 days. He stayed quiet for the rest of that shift too, because Elio needed the lights on, because the rent was already late, because there were 11 job applications out there with no answers and Pruitt knew it. He clocked out at 9, walked the 12 blocks home because the bus pass had run out and he wasn't using the last $12 in his account on a fare. The night air was cold enough that he could see his breath. He climbed the stairs to the apartment, key in the lock, door open, and stopped, because there was no sound. There should have been sound. The TV that Elio always left on. The neighbor's dog through the wall. Something. Then from the hallway. Small voice. Not afraid. Just very quiet. Papa. And then, someone's here. He pushed the door open the rest of the way. 3 men. Standing in the living room like they had always been there. Like the apartment had been built around them. They weren't moving, weren't speaking, just present, taking up space the way very large, very certain people do without even trying. The one closest to the door was looking directly at Caius. The other 2 had their attention on Elio, who was standing near the couch in his socks, blanket trailing behind him, completely calm. The door was still open behind Caius. He did not move. You didn't answer. The one nearest the door said it. Not loud. Not threatening, just a statement, like they were continuing a conversation that had only been briefly interrupted. Caius found his voice somewhere beneath the cold and the exhaustion and the thing that was hammering in his chest. How did you get in here? Not a question. Not really. Door was unlocked. It wasn't. He always locked it. He had been locking it since Elio was 4 because this building had a problem on the 2nd floor and the super never fixed the outer door latch and the lock is old, the second one said. Just that. Just the simple fact of it. Caius took 1 step forward. You need to leave. None of them moved. And then Elio walked toward them. Not running. Not hesitating. Just walked right across the living room like he had decided something, dragging the blanket behind him, and stopped in front of the one nearest the window. He looked up at the man with those quiet eyes. The man looked down. Neither of them said anything. And then, slowly, deliberately, the man nearest the window lowered himself. Not all the way down. Just enough. Knees slightly bent, massive frame folding just enough to bring his face closer to Elio's level. Caius's throat tightened. Danger doesn't always feel like danger. Sometimes it feels like safety you don't understand. Like something your body recognizes before your brain catches up. and watching his 7-year-old son stand there without fear, not performing bravery, just genuinely unafraid, was the most disorienting thing Caius had experienced in a very long time. "Why are you here?" His voice came out harder than he intended. Flat. Direct. The one near the door finally shifted. Not toward him. Just turned slightly, enough to face him fully. Because no one else was. The words landed. Caius wanted to argue with them. Wanted to say that wasn't an answer, that it was a non-answer, that it explained nothing. But it was sitting in his chest doing something he didn't have words for, and arguing with the truth of it would have required energy he no longer had. "That doesn't give you the right to be in my home." "No," the man agreed. "It doesn't." A pause. Long enough to feel it. "But you were never meant to stay in that place." Elio had not moved. Still standing in front of the one by the window. Still looking up at him like he was trying to figure something out. The man had not touched him. Had not reached out, had not spoken to him. Had not done anything except stay still and let the boy look. Caius watched them. And heard the words again. "You were never meant to stay there." He opened his mouth to demand answers. Real ones, not riddles, not statements that felt like they meant something. And then the one closest to the door spoke again. Quieter this time. Like he was letting Caius catch up before the next part. "And because you were never meant to stay there," he let the silence stretch. "We made sure you won't have to." Caius stared at him. "What does that mean?" No answer. Just the three of them. Standing in his living room. Looking at him like they already knew what came next. And from outside, from the hallway, from the stairwell, from somewhere just beyond the open door behind him. Footsteps. Getting closer. The footsteps stopped. Just outside the door. Close enough that Caius could hear the weight of them. Heavy, deliberate. Not in a hurry. He turned. The hallway was empty. The stairwell light was on. Nothing moved. He stood there for 3 full seconds waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. When he turned back around, the 3 men were watching him. Not with alarm. Not with the particular energy of people who had been caught off guard. Just watching. Like they already knew what was in that hallway and had already decided it wasn't a problem. That should not have made him feel better. It did. He didn't sleep again that night. But this time it was different. Not the hollow, fraying kind of sleeplessness he'd been carrying for weeks. This was something else. Something that sat in the room with him and wouldn't let him settle. He kept coming back to the same thing. How Elio had walked toward 3 strangers without hesitation. How the boy had stood in front of the biggest one and just looked at him, calm as water, like he'd already made his decision before his brain had a chance to argue with it. Children know things. That thought stayed with him until morning. The knock came at 7:42. Not the door. The building entrance buzzer. He pressed the intercom button. Nobody spoke. He almost let it go, wrong unit, wrong building. But the buzzer went again, 2 short bursts, and something made him press the release. He heard the truck before he saw it. By the time he got to the window, it was already there. White delivery truck, no logo, backed up to the curb. 2 men he didn't recognize were carrying boxes through the building entrance. Not running. Moving with the calm efficiency of people doing a job they'd done 100 times. He opened the apartment door. They brought it up in 4 trips. Food. Actual groceries. Not the marked down stuff from the bin at the back of the corner store. Not the generic boxes with the white labels. Real food. Things Elio liked. Things Caius hadn't bought in months because the math never worked out that way. There was an envelope underneath the last box. He almost missed it. Plain white. No name on the outside. Inside, enough cash to cover the rent. 3 months. He sat down on the kitchen floor. He didn't plan to. His knees just decided that was where they were going and he didn't argue. He sat there on the cold linoleum with the envelope in his hands and the food on the counter and Elio, who had woken up at some point during the second trip. Standing in the kitchen doorway with his eyes wide and his mouth slightly open. Then the boy smiled. The full one. The one that took over his whole face and made his nose scrunch up at the corners. Caius hadn't seen it in so long he'd almost forgotten what it looked like. It broke something open in him. Relief can be dangerous. Not because it feels bad. Because it feels so good that you stop paying attention. Convinces you the problem has been solved. The hard part is over. Now you can breathe. And while you're breathing, while your guard is all the way down, things shift. He put Elio's favorite cereal in the cabinet. Lined everything up. Let himself feel, just for a few minutes, like things were going to be okay. Then his phone buzzed. He picked it up. Do not return to work tomorrow. He went anyway. This is the part that matters. Not the delivery truck. Not the envelope. Not even the cash. This, the part where Caius Beaumont put his jacket on the next morning, kissed Elio on the top of his head, and walked out the door toward a job that hadn't paid him in 19 days. Because that's what you do when you've been surviving long enough. You don't stop showing up just because someone tells you to. You can't afford to believe in warnings you don't understand. He got to the diner at 10:53 and stopped. The door was locked. Not just locked, chained. An actual chain through the handles, padlocked. A paper notice on the glass, official-looking, city seal in the upper corner. He pressed his face close enough to read the top line. Temporary closure. Pending investigation. He stepped back. 2 cars were parked half on the sidewalk. Not police cruisers. Unmarked, but unmistakably official. The kind of vehicles that don't need to announce themselves because everyone already knows what they mean. A man in a gray jacket was standing near the side entrance talking into a phone. He glanced at Caius once, didn't stop talking. Caius looked through the window. The inside of the diner was untouched. Chairs still at the tables. Salt shakers still where they always were. The coffee urns behind the counter. Everything normal. Everything exactly as it had been the night before. Except Devlin Pruitt was gone. Not just not there. Gone. The manager's office, a glass-walled rectangle visible from the dining room floor, had the chair pushed back from the desk at an angle that said left in a hurry, and that was the only detail out of place in the whole room. The woman from the booth next door was standing on the sidewalk watching. You work there? She asked. I did. She pulled her coat tighter. They're saying he ran off with 2 years' worth of payroll. Not just yours. Everyone's. She shook her head. Investigation. Fraud. Something about the ownership records not matching. She looked at the door. People are saying he was gone before dawn. Caius stared at the chain on the door. 19 days. That was all he'd been counting. His 19 days. But 2 years of payroll meant Pruitt had been doing this long before Caius walked through that door. Long before the first excuse about payroll delays. Long before the first week that turned into 2 that turned into 3. The man had been doing exactly this to exactly these kinds of people. People who couldn't afford to push back. For 2 full years. And nobody had said a word. Justice doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't show up with a speech. It doesn't give you a moment to prepare. Sometimes it just arrives quietly, removes the problem while you're not looking, and leaves silence where something rotten used to be. He walked home. The whole way, one thought kept pushing at the back of his mind. He had worked for Pruitt for 8 months. The messages had started 3 weeks ago. Someone had known about this long before Caius did. He got back to the apartment, unlocked the door, pushed it open. The 3 men were already there, sitting in his living room like they belonged in it, like they had been there before, and Caius realized with a cold drop in his stomach that maybe that was exactly the point. Elio was next to the one by the window, showing him something in a book, and the man was looking at it with the focused attention of someone who was genuinely interested. None of them looked up right away. The one nearest the door finally spoke. That place wasn't your problem. Caius closed the door. Stood very still. We know. Pause. Long. You were. That sentence sat in the room. Caius didn't move. Didn't speak. Let it sit there because he needed a second. Needed to hear it again in his own head before he responded to it, because if he responded to the wrong version of it, he was going to say something he couldn't take back. You were. What does that mean? His voice came out flat. Controlled. The kind of controlled that takes work. The one nearest the door stood up. Not fast. Just stood, the full height of him filling the space between them, and crossed to the window where Elio and the other one were still looking at the book. He looked down at the boy for a moment, and something passed over his face. Not tenderness exactly, but something adjacent to it, something careful. Then he turned back to Caius. We weren't watching you because of the diner. Then why? Because someone else was. The temperature in the room didn't change, but it felt like it did. Caius looked from one to the next. 3 identical faces. 3 sets of eyes holding the same level, measured patience. None of them performing calm. They just were calm, the way certain people are when they've been in enough rooms where things go wrong to have stopped being rattled by the possibility. Say that again. Someone else was watching you. Before we were. The one closest to the door met his eyes. Someone who doesn't have the same intentions. Who? No answer. Who is watching me? Who? That's not the part you need to know right now. Caius took 2 steps forward. It absolutely is. It's the part, the man said, without raising his voice, without moving back even half an inch, that we're making sure stays away from you. Which means right now, the part you need to know is this: you were not randomly struggling at that diner. You were placed there, and kept there, by someone who needed you to stay small, stay broke, stay in one place. The room went very quiet. Elio had stopped turning pages. You think we stepped in because of charity? The one by the window spoke now, for the first time, and his voice was lower than the others, slower. We don't do charity. Control feels like a threat until you understand what it's protecting you from. Until you see the shape of what's on the other side of it. And Caius was starting to see that shape. It was still blurry, still incomplete, but it was there. An outline of something that had apparently been organizing itself around him for months while he was too exhausted and too broke to notice. You've been watching me, he said. For how long? Long enough. That's not an answer. No, the man agreed. It isn't. Elio set the book down, looked up at the one next to him, then at Caius, then at the one by the door. Then he walked to the one in the center of the room. The one who hadn't spoken yet, who had stood the whole time slightly apart from the other 2, and reached up and took the man's hand. Just took it, like it was already his to take. Caius watched his son do that and felt something shift in his chest that he did not have a name for. The man looked down at Elio, then up at Caius, and spoke for the first time. You were already marked before we arrived. Pause. We didn't start this. Another pause. Longer. But we're the ones who are going to finish it. Caius walked to the window, stood with his back to all of them and looked at the street below. The cracked sidewalk, the corner store with the awning that hadn't been fully raised in 2 years. A woman pushing a stroller over a broken section of curb with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Ordinary. Everything out there was ordinary. And in here, in this small apartment that smelled like the groceries they just stacked in the kitchen, something was happening that he didn't have language for yet. He turned around. I don't belong to anyone. He said it clearly. No waver. And for the first time since they had appeared in his living room, the 3 of them didn't answer immediately. Just looked at him. Like the sentence was something they were each processing separately. Then the one who had held Elio's hand said, Not yet. 2 words. Somehow the most unsettling thing any of them had said. Caius pointed at the door. You need to explain what's coming for me. Right now. Not pieces. Not riddles. All of it. Because I have a 7-year-old in this apartment and I am not going to let something I don't understand walk in and hurt him. The one by the door moved first. He sat down. The chair that nobody ever used, the one near the bookshelf, the one Caius had always meant to fix because one leg was slightly shorter than the others. He sat in it without commenting on the wobble and looked at Caius with the kind of directness that makes you want to look away. 3 years ago, he began. A file was opened. Your name was in it. What kind of file? The kind that tracks people who carry something others want. Caius waited. Your name came to us through a contact inside the organization that opened it. By the time we understood what they were planning, what they were keeping you from, and why, you had already been maneuvered into that diner. Isolated. Financially cornered. That was intentional. The hardest choices aren't between good and bad. They're between fear and uncertainty. Between what you know, even if it's painful, and what you don't, which might be worse. Caius had spent 3 years surviving on the fear side, knowing exactly how bad things were. At least then he had the shape of it. This was uncertainty with teeth. What do they want from me? Silence. That, the one by the window said, is the part we're still protecting. You don't trust me. We don't trust what happens to you if you know everything too early. Elio had moved. He was standing next to the center one again, and this time the man had placed one hand lightly on the boy's shoulder. Not grabbing, not restraining, just there. Elio was leaning into it. Caius looked at his son leaning into a stranger like he'd found a wall to rest against. And something in him, the last held-up part, the part that had been white-knuckling for 3 years, started to give. If I stay, he said carefully, what does that look like? Different, the one in the center said. From everything that came before. That's not. I know it's not specific enough. For the first time, something that wasn't quite a smile crossed the man's face. Not warm exactly, but real. It never is. At first. Caius looked at Elio. Elio looked back. Papa, the boy said. Just that. Just his name. But the way he said it, the certainty in it, carried the weight of something Caius had been trying to build for 3 years. A full sentence in one word. He opened his mouth to respond. And heard it. Outside the door. The sound of the hallway. Footsteps again, but not the measured ones from before. These were faster. And there were more of them. All 3 men went still at the exact same moment. Different kind of still. The kind that comes right before something moves. The center one spoke first. One word. Quiet. Like he was telling the other 2 something they already half knew. Now. They moved. Not chaotic. No scrambling, no alarm. Just the immediate, coordinated shift of people who had planned for exactly this moment and had been waiting to see which version of it showed up. The one by the door positioned himself in front of it without touching the handle. The one by the window moved Elio, gently, hands on his shoulders, to the far wall behind the couch. The center one crossed to Caius in 3 steps. Don't move from this spot. What is happening? Stay. The footsteps in the hallway stopped. Right outside the door. A long pause. Long enough that the silence became its own kind of pressure. Caius could hear Elio breathing behind the couch. Could hear his own heartbeat doing something irregular in his chest. He had spent the last few days recalibrating everything he thought he knew about his situation. The diner, the missing pay, the messages, the groceries, the cash. And he had been building, slowly, a version of events he could almost hold in his hands. That version had not included this. The one at the door spoke without turning around. You should have stayed hidden. Not to Caius. To whoever was on the other side of it. Silence from the hallway. Then a voice came through the door. Low, male. Unhurried in a way that made it worse. Not the pace of someone uncertain, but the pace of someone who had done this before and had stopped bothering to perform urgency. Open the door. That's not going to happen. It doesn't need to. A pause. I just came to confirm something. Confirm it and leave. Another pause. Then, he's still here. Not a question. A statement. Confirmation of something already known. Something checked off a list, a location confirmed, a detail locked in. It was the particular flatness of someone who had found what they were looking for and no longer needed to keep looking. Caius felt the cold move through him. They weren't there to take him tonight. They were there to mark the location. The one at the door understood this at the same moment. Caius could see it in the set of his shoulders, the slight shift, the recalibration. You already know he's here, the man said through the door. So say what you actually came to say. A long beat. Tell him, the voice said slowly, that the window is getting smaller. Footsteps. Retreating. Unhurried. Down the hall to the stairwell, then gone. The room held still for another 10 seconds. Then the one at the door turned around. Caius looked at him. They didn't come to do anything tonight. No. They came to let me know they know where I am. Yes. He looked at Elio, who had not made a sound from behind the couch. Just crouched there with his knees pulled up, watching. Still not scared. Still just watching. Taking it in with those big quiet eyes. Something inside Caius made a decision that his mouth hadn't caught up to yet. He had spent 3 years choosing small. Choosing safe. Choosing the version of things that kept them fed and out of trouble and below whatever line separated visible from invisible. He had been very good at invisible. He had worked 19 days without $1 and kept his head down and thanked a man who was stealing from him and walked 12 blocks in the cold rather than spend the last of his money on a bus fare. And invisible hadn't kept them safe. It had just made them easier to corner. He looked at the center one. What do I need to do? The man looked at him for a moment. First, you stop running from the idea that you matter. And then you let us do what we came here to do. Caius held his gaze. Which is what exactly? The man took one step closer. Not aggressive. Not slow either. Just direct. Protect what's ours. The word sat between them. Ours. Not yours. Not his. Not a transaction or a favor or something with terms attached. Just ours. Like it had already been decided. Like the only person in this room who hadn't gotten the news yet was Caius himself. Elio came out from behind the couch, walked to the center man, took his hand again, and looked up at his father with that particular expression, the one that wasn't asking permission, the one that had already decided. Caius stared at his son, then at the three of them. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was steady. Okay. Just that. Just, okay. And in the morning, when the sun came back and the street outside sounded like itself again and Elio was eating the cereal he liked at the kitchen table, Caius sat across from him and thought about all the walls he had built. Carefully, brick by brick, to keep the two of them small enough to survive. And wondered, for the first time, what they might look like without them. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know the name of the voice in the hallway, or the shape of whatever was moving toward them, or whether the 3 men across from him at the counter on that first night had already known, even then, exactly how this moment would go. But Elio was laughing at something on the cereal box, and the lights were on, and the door was locked from the inside. And for the first time in 3 years, for the first time in a very long time, Caius Beaumont was not alone in the dark. Behind him, in the living room, the one by the window spoke. Quiet, not directed at Caius. Almost to himself. He said yes. A pause. Then the voice at the door. He always was going to. And from somewhere, the hallway, the stairwell, somewhere just beyond what Caius could see. A phone rang once, then went silent. And whoever was on the other end of it already had their answer. If this story moved you, if any part of Caius and Elio's journey hit somewhere real, drop a comment below. Tell us which moment got you. Tell us which chapter you could not stop watching. And if you know someone who has been working hard and feeling invisible, someone who deserves to be seen, share this with them. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show someone they are not alone. Subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications. Because the stories we tell here are not just stories. They are mirrors. And there is always another one coming. We will see you in the next one.